But Mug's a good, you know, it couldn't be a better guy to really stick with and study all his compositions and see how he goes about improvising on it. Because he's not maybe that one, but there's some really tough tunes, as you all know, because it's just unique harmony. So I'm glad to see you're spending some time on that repertoire, because there's none like it. So, let me think. Where was I? So let me.
I want to ask you a question. I mean, when you were talking so much about your influences and all the people that you studied, when did you? And I guess this maybe if you can answer for your brother too. But when did you all start feeling that you needed to compelled to like add to the vocabulary? In other words, develop your own style as opposed to just imitating.
Well, it was a long, slow haul, so to speak. And it's a good question, and I was going to get to it. So let's talk about that for a while. So it's all related to kind of the biography. So I spent 3.5 years studying with David at IU. We had a really good big band. We won the Notre Dame Jazz Festival in 1965, and we were afforded a State Department tour. So instead of finishing, I ended up going on this tour. We went to Middle East and Asia, heard a lot of Indian music. You know, it was fascinating. Imagine I was probably 16, I think, or let's see if this was 65. I was a little older, maybe 18 or 19, yeah, so I was about 19 years old, going on 20. Went to India, Pakistan, all the countries that are all aflame now. Spent about 4 months, a month in Baghdad, Beirut, Damascus, Aleppo. You know, it's just tragic what's going on over there. But because it was a State Department tour, we were readily able to mix with all the people, heard a lot of amazing music. Still, some of it has an influence on me today. After that, I ended up going to, there was a contest. Just mention this as kind of interesting little sidelight, and this had a lot to do with me trying to eventually find my own voice. But in the summer of 1966 in Vienna, it was advertised jazz competition, and the judges were Cannonball Adderley, J.J. Johnson, Joe Zawinul, Ron Carter, Mel Lewis, and Art Farmer. So the guys who were the jazz players in the band were already, you know, kind of in Europe on our way home. We got to make it to. They had been paying us too, like $12 a day, so we had a little money in our pocket, the State Department. So we went to this competition, and we stayed in a youth hostel with a bunch of other young kids, all our age, and the people like, and this is where we all met. It was fascinating when you look back on it. Miroslav Vitus, George Mraz, Jan Hammer, Eddie Daniels was there. He was already playing in Thad and Mel's band, so that wasn't quite fair. He was a little older. Franco Ambrosetti, Joachim Kuhn, Jiggs Wiggum, Tomasz Stanko, Claudio Roditi. That's how we all, it was just a happenstance. The only year they ever had that. And so we all competed, and I got second place on trumpet. Franco beat me by 1/10 of a point. He admitted. Last year I had a gig, he said, you know, I only beat you by 1/10 of a point. and the first 7 bass players, I mean, Miroslav won, and George Mraz by 1/10 of a point. So I had a band. I kind of led the second band. We had Jan Hammer, who was playing like Wynton Kelly back then. So it was fascinating. We all kind of helped each other when we moved to New York, because a lot of us moved shortly after that to New York. But a lot of these guys already kind of had their own identity. And when I moved to New York, I joined a band called Dreams, which was an early jazz rock band that my brother had, in the interim, moved to New York and met a guy named Barry Rogers, a wonderful trombonist, who in turn met a pair of singer-songwriters. I had been playing with Horace Silver, and Horace had broken up the band. Billy Cobham was the drummer. So we came back to New York in 1969, 1970 without a gig, and we formed this band. Mike said, well, we need a drummer and a trumpet player. You guys want to try this band? So we joined the band, and I think that was the first place where I started to realize that you know, we had something different going as a horn section, number one, with myself, Mike, and Barry Rogers, because we jammed up all the parts. It was unlike previous jazz rock bands like Blood, Sweat and Tears or Chicago. All the music was, we had the time to do it. We just rehearsed every day and nothing was ever written down. They would just play the tunes and we'd figure out horn parts. And, you know, from playing with records, it's all connected. I was good at hearing stuff and remembering stuff by ear. Barry was great at finding inner parts, and my brother was already developing as a unique soloist, even though I almost didn't realize it. So I think that was where the seeds were planted, plus every once in a while I wrote out a little horn thing. If I heard something, there was a little horn section, a little thing I'd write out, but 99% of what we played was improvised. And by then I had gotten a piano in my apartment and I started writing little songs, and the first time I got to utilize them was a record called Score, which was recorded in 1968. And Mike actually was still at Indiana University, so I flew him, he was 19, and we recorded this record called Score, which was out on the Solid State label. So you can still find it, it's either under Brecker Brothers or Score or my name, but we did half the record with an acoustic quartet. Larry Coryell played. It was an original kind of jazz rocker I met in Seattle, and Bob Cranshaw and Mickey Roker or Eddie Gomez was on some tracks, but on some tracks I brought in some funk guys, Bernard Purdy and Chuck Rainey, and we did some really funky stuff. Duke Pearson was the producer, and he hadn't heard of Bernard Purdy, or it's kind of far out to that you'd think that he would have never heard of him, or Chuck Rainey. He didn't know what to make of it. But this stuff came out really good too. I wrote some tunes and Hal wrote some tunes, and the record kind of got a pretty good reception. People liked the way Mike played. He was only 19 and he hadn't really formed his style yet. You could tell he was developing. But through that and then Dreams, and then I started to become more confident as a writer and realizing that I really had to have my own thing, you know, as both as a writer and as a player, to answer the question, because you know, there were all these great bands around. Previous, you know, before I moved to New York, you had all these classic records, Miles with the Classic Quintet, Herbie, Speak Like a Child, and Native Dancer, and I could go on and on with the classic Blue Note record. So I didn't just want to recreate that. You know, I was a good bebopper, but I had other things in mind. So it's funny how things are connected. It was really a specific thing. Remember I said I went to band camp when I was 15 and I met Sanborn. Well, Sanborn in the interim had moved to New York. So by 1972 or 3, he was around, and we were, I thought it would be a great idea to, after Dreams broke up, to get me, Mike, and Sanborn together and me actually write the charts. So I was doing a lot of studio work at the time, and I was completely self-taught, other than the fact that Dave Baker helped me with voicings, and I sat at the piano for hours every day picking out stuff, and I got to be a pretty good piano player. Also, I took a few lessons with Richie Byrack to learn some Herbie voicings, and he was great too. But I basically just sat at the piano and tried to come up with stuff for specific people. Myself, Mike, Sanborn. I was playing a lot with Don Grolnick on keyboards, Will Lee on bass. They had been also in Dreams, and Steve Kahn on guitar, and a guy named Chris Parker on drums. And I had, in my mindset, I wanted to use Harvey Mason on drums when if I ever recorded this stuff, because I had played at a jam session in Berkeley with Jan and Mraz, who had moved to New York and got a visa by going to Berkeley, and they told me about this young drummer who plays like Tony Williams. Turns out it was well, I can't think of his name now. What did I just say? Harvey. Yeah, who later then I heard on Herbie's record. So I said, man, I got to get this guy to record this stuff I'm writing. So I just started to write this stuff, sight unseen. I had a title of a tune. It's funny how these things work, because a lot of people want to know what do you come up with first. Sometimes I had a bass line, sometimes I had a melody. Skunk Funk had, and he was like putting a giant puzzle together. It's funny enough, I had the title years earlier. Clark Terry had me pick up some plane tickets from her secretary. She lived near me, and I went to her apartment to get the tickets, and it was like a weird odor in the apartment. And I said, "What's that smell?" Her name was Wendy. I'll never forget this. She said, "Well, I have like a back room. I have some pets." And she opened this door, and it was like 10 animals in this room. Illegal. She had a pet skunk. I was like, "You mean that's some skunk funk?"
Skunk Funk.
And I said, "Oh." That's, you know, man, so I had the title for it. I said, "I gotta write a tune." So eventually I wrote a tune because I had the title first. But sometimes I had the melody, sometimes I had a bass line, sometimes I was heavily into, I had a Rhodes, and by now I was living in a loft and I had a bunch of equipment, a Rhodes, a clavinet, and I really liked playing clavinet, so that was it. And also, another event, like we in this band Dreams, we were together 2 years. It was successful in a way, like underground, but John McLaughlin had kind of stolen Billy from us when he started Mahavishnu Orchestra. That's why we broke up. We couldn't find a drummer. And I listened to John's writing, and there was something in the writing that said, I remember just sitting there listening to the first record, which I loved, but I said, you know, I can write too. I'm starting to write. I just want to do my own thing. And eventually that group, the stuff I had been writing, became the Brecker Brothers. I actually was intent on doing a solo record, but a producer. I was just getting ready to, I had written 9 charts, among them Skunk Funk, Sponge, all the stuff that was on this first record. I was just getting ready to go in the studio and do a demo, and a guy called, said, you know, my name's Steve Brecker. I just signed a production deal with the great Clive Davis, who was a famous guy in the business. He had signed us to Columbia Records. And he said, if you call your band the Brecker Brothers, I'll sign you. You don't have to do a demo. You can just do the record tomorrow. It's a great opportunity. It's going to be a new label. You know, Clive is really famous in the industry. He's going to really make it into something. It was called Bell Records. Then it's going to be Arista Records, and he's got this young kid. He's on his way up. Barry Manilow. He just signed him. You know, and at first I said no because I wanted it to be my own record. And it was also going to be weird with Sanborn standing there out front. It just shows you how all this stuff is connected. But eventually I said, okay, call it Brecker Bros. And we went in and recorded everything. And that's really not the end of the story even, because as much as Clive, and I got Harvey Mason to come in from LA, use all these guys that we were rehearsing with, Ralph McDonald on percussion. And the session went really well because we really knew the music. We've been, you know, like you guys do. We got together every week for months, not only rehearsing my tunes, but Don Grolnick was writing a lot of stuff that he eventually recorded, and Steve Kahn was writing a lot of stuff that he eventually recorded. But Clive heard the 9 tunes, said, well, they're really great, and he came to some of the rehearsals, and remember, as a joke, at the rehearsal we tried to play Skunk Funk as fast as we could, and now this is how fast we play it now, for real. We all thought it was a big joke. But he said, you know, I went up to his office. This just goes to show you how these things work sometimes. He said, I really love everything you wrote, but you need a single. This was 1974, going into 75, remember. So I said, no, I don't want to do a single. This was supposed to be, first of all, it's supposed to be Randy Brecker Records. Now it's called Brecker Brothers. And I just wanted to write everything. I don't want to, you know, have to do a single. It was supposed to be just this. And basically said, if you don't do a single, I'm not putting the record out. That's how Clive worked. So I trudged out of the office and got everybody together, and we jammed up a tune called Sneaking Up Behind You. And stuck it on, we recorded it 2 or 3 days later. Clive came to the end of the session and loved it. Actually, it was amazing that we jammed it up in 3 hours, I think. And that tune became a hit. But it got up to about number 3 on the R&B charts, and as a result, the whole record got up to about it was in the 50s on the pop chart. So we were all in amazing shock. But we also, quite honestly, spent the next 5 records trying to get the second hit, which didn't ever quite happen. But we made a lot of good records in the interim. But that's the answer in a
Yeah.
nutshell. And during this time, I was also using pedals. That helped with my identity, to separate myself from some of the other guys that were playing acoustically. Also, I was just trying to, as did my brother, trying to broaden my jazz vocabulary by keeping a notebook and just playing like any number of, I would just play. Like at one part of my practice routine, and Mike would do this a lot, he got this idea from, I think, Mike Lawrence, or I think it was Mike Lawrence, who would just play anything. Whatever that line was, it was just all some intervallic stuff. That wasn't too bad, actually. So, and we'd write it down, record everything, write it down, and maybe that would become a tune. The first was just something I played. It kind of sounds like Miles Moa, but you can maybe use that as an intro. So I do that pretty regularly, so I have a number of just my own licks. I mean, also I readily admit I steal from the best of them. I still know a lot of Woody Shaw licks, or Miles or Freddie, but at the same time, there's any number of ones of my own licks. I can't play it right now. Or any little short phrases that I know will work under a certain chord, or phrases that just seem to work, and I just constantly add to it, and I try to pick out in my vocabulary what separates me from some other guys, and hopefully I've kind of the sound thing. I just always try to work on my sound. That's kind of an individual thing, but everybody's got their own sound. Just try to consciously not try to sound like anyone else. Yeah.
I was curious, on that song you said, on the hit song that you said you jammed up,
Yeah.
like you all just did it collectively.
Yeah.
Who actually owned the song? Was it the entire band? Or
Yeah, well, it was truly, the stars were in the right place. There were like 5 writers, because we
So
were,
it's like a collaborative work, and when you copyright it or whatever, it's...
I still have the tape. Don Grolnick had an idea. This is how it started. But we were good at jamming stuff up. It goes back to dreams, because we would jam all this stuff up. We were just good at, somebody had an idea, somebody started a vamp, we started playing. So the original idea was, he had, so he said, well, you guys play this lick all the time. My tongue is slower than it used to be back. So that, we started to harmonize that. So that kind of became the hook. And then Grolnick came up with an intro, and slowly but surely, I said the stars were really in the right place. Will thought of a title. He could sing, so he thought of Sneaking Up Behind You, and he wrote a little interlude. That was the only thing we didn't jam up. He's kind of stuck that in there. But so within a day, we just had it tuned. The melody was, I forget what key it's in. I haven't played this in 30 years. Let's see if I can remember. I can't. That was the whole melody. Then the hook was. Then we had another hook at the end, but Clive made us stick with the original hook. But like I said, that sold the record. Nobody really listened to Skunk Funk. That was a slower sell. All that stuff kind of caught on later. But it was amazing what a hit will do. So, maybe in retrospect, it's kind of set us off on a path that we shouldn't have been following, because we always tried to reconnect, because next thing you know, we're doing a bunch of festivals, so that was part of the game back then. Now it's a whole different ball game, because everybody has singles out. But that was really a pretty long answer to your question, and we just started writing for our own projects. We always had, every year we had to do a record, and then we were really under a deadline to write. And at the same time, we were adding pedals and just developing our sound as a section, horn section, and it was almost like a sixth sense as far as the section. We had certain little nuances, vibrato, the way we played phrases that we didn't have to talk about. Sanborn was with us, I think, for the first 3 records. And it was just a unique conception. It was great to write for people that you knew you were writing for specific people. But then everybody started to write. It wasn't only me. Mike started to write eventually. And we kept developing the sound. But it comes early on. The interesting thing about it is, you know, I met all these guys when I was your age, you know, when I was young, and right after school. So now's the time to kind of form those, and I still play. The guys that are left are still around.
It seems like all the people you've met, you know, from all around the world, even Europe, all the great jazz musicians we know about, it seems like New York was sort of like the focal point. Everybody was trying to get to New York, you know.
Yeah.
You think that, I mean, I know that was always important. It was important when I was younger, too. You think that's still the case now?
No,
like
now,
everybody should go to New York, or are there other hot spots?
We were talking about that, you know, New York is a place to visit, I think, for, you know, a certain amount of time, as long as your money holds out. But it's not the Mecca, and it hasn't been for a long time. You know, music, all kinds of music, but particularly jazz, has really become globalized, and you can go anywhere, you know. And the thing I've noticed from traveling around, specifically in the U.S. and internationally, is there are great, you know, local scenes everywhere now. And a lot of times better than New York, because there's so many musicians in New York, and as we were talking about earlier, a lot of guys almost pay to, and they do pay to play, because there's so much competition. There's not that many gigs, and it became like a thing, you know, pay for the door, play for the door, and then some club owner had the idea, no, we'll split the door. And there's so many guys that want to play, they were willing to play for literally just give the guy the door. So it's tough there these days. But what's happened is, in so many other cities, there's a really nice nucleus of a jazz scene with local jazz orchestras, jazz big bands. There's going to be a new one in Philadelphia. I'm going to go there. Philadelphia, I don't know what they're calling it, Philadelphia Jazz Orchestra. That one's long overdue. The Terrell Stafford's going to lead. And like I said, when I go to Europe, I'm always amazed too. You know, coming back from Goshitsa, there was good musicians there. You know, they played great. Polish guys, Eastern Europe. I was in London, Paris. There's just a bunch of meccas now, so it's not, everything isn't directed to New York. And I remember Joe Zawinul saying that years ago. I went to hear Syndicate with when Richard Boner first was playing with him, and Zawinul, who's from Vienna, as we all know, gave a speech. He said, you know, don't look to America anymore for this music. It's all over the place. He had an African drummer. He had a gypsy accordionist, Lalo Nico. So he really had a worldwide band. So in answer, but still, New York is great to check out. You know, there's a lot of clubs there, as there are here, and there's always a lot of great music going on.
Talk a little bit, I mean, you've enjoyed great success monetarily, I assume, you know. I mean, you had your own jazz club in 7th Avenue South, because I went there, which was really amazing to me, because you always think of jazz musicians as being completely starving or whatever. But when you were younger, before you had an identity as the Brecker brothers or Randy Brecker or whatever, talk a little bit about how you made money. I mean, you did a lot of studio recording, and you know, talk to the kids that that want to strive to have the big names and stuff like that. But
it's a completely different scene now. But when I was just, in a lot of ways, there's 2 lessons to be learned. When opportunity knocked, when Steve Becker called and said, you know, you want to record something, I had stuff to record. So that was very important. But I was also, in a sense, came to New York at the right time, where there was a lot of studio work, and I was lucky enough to catch the tail end of the classic studio guys with Oliver Nelson. You know, everybody went to work in a suit and tie, and everybody was in the studio at the same time. We played with the violins, Oliver Nelson or J.J. Johnson was still in New York, and the piano player might be Herbie Hancock, and the other trumpet player might be Thad Jones or Snooky Young or Clark Terry. That was a great 2 or 3 years. I came to New York in '66, and but you know, I had my own thing going. I had kind of longer hair. I'd come out still with the jazz rock thing. I joined Blood, Sweat, and Tears. I felt comfortable in that kind of situation for a while, although I didn't get to play a lot in that band, so I eventually left to join Horace Silver. But at an early age, I learned that there was a world outside of jazz, going back to Philly. And certainly in the year I spent with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, I realized there were thousands and thousands and thousands of kids that wanted to hear music, maybe not necessarily jazz per se, but jazz-influenced music they seemed to like. You know, there was, we opened Blood, Sweat, and Tears opened the show for Cream, for instance, and they would just jam for hours. And there was 3 guys that was loud as hell, and some I liked, some of it I didn't, but they would improvise. So the trick was finding a way to improvise that you could relate to a larger audience. This is what we did, and by playing around New York with various groups, Dreams in particular, we got known as a kind of a horn section, me, Mike, and Sanborn, and Will Lee, and Bronick, and Steve Kahn, who played with us eventually, and Hiram Bullock, and Chris Parker, and Gadd, became known as a rhythm section. There was a lot of studio work, so we got drawn into that, and that's really how we made a living. And we were very young, not spending a lot of money, so we were able to, you know, save money and invest in the jazz club, and then we lost all the money by investing in that. Not a great idea, but it was a lot of fun. But you know, these days it's a whole different ball game with the social networking. You just have to constantly get your stuff out there. It's a whole different ball game, and I would be remiss, you know, I mean, there's probably more studio work, I would imagine, in New Orleans than there is in New York. There's very little of that goes on. It's mostly Broadway shows and some Latin gigs, I guess. So things, you have to really just stay up with the technological curve and be a part of it. I didn't like, you know, I don't like doing it myself, but it's something you have to do. That's a long answer in a nutshell.
Probably. Does anybody have any questions? We should probably love to hear you play one more tune before we wrap things up, but does anybody have any questions that we'd like to ask?
Well, I'll be around tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll be around.
What was it like playing with Jocko?
Well, it's great playing with Jocko. You know, even this will be a really good direction. Peter Erskine just released a book that you can download on Kindle, and I just read it, and it's all about playing with Weather Report and Jocko and all those years, and it's really great. It has a lot of pictures, so if you're interested in Weather Report and Jocko and all those years, I heartily recommend. Again, I forget what it costs, but you can either buy a paperback version or just download it. And Jocko was amazing. You know, he was a guy that had an original concept the first time he picked up the bass. He also played everything: drums, French horn, piano, and it was a unique genius. He had his own sound, great composer, but it had a lot of personal demons, as we all know, and that's what eventually, unfortunately, contributed to his demise. But definitely get Peter's book. It's called No Beethoven, but you can find, if you just look up under Peter Erskine, you'll easily find it. So what do you want to play? You want to do another monk tune, or just we're going to be playing this tomorrow?
Okay.
Let's do Evidence. What the heck? Practice it. Okay. Okay, who somebody count it off. Whoever is Oh yeah, 8-bar drum in front, okay.
Thank